In the closing part of this second letter to the Corinthians, St. Paul deals with a couple of very difficult issues. The first one he deals with, we're going to talk about this morning, is church conflict. Now, unless you fell off the turnip truck last night, you realize that there is conflict within churches. There's conflict everywhere. Why would we think that the church would be any different? Because the same people that are out there causing conflict, sometimes they come in here and cause conflict. Now, I was an interim pastor in Sacramento Presbytery for about 15 years, and they sent me to all the churches that had the conflict. I guess it's because they thought I was too stupid to say no. Probably I was. But I've dealt with a lot of church conflict in my time, and there's one thing that the Apostle Paul says that I agree with. It's that spiritual conflict requires tough love. You see, all of this conflict in churches is spiritual. Even if it's a disagreement over something silly. Did you know that the First Presbyterian Church of Bakersfield, California, about blew up because they had a committee of women put together new material for the pews. And they went and they picked the committee, and the thing they did wrong was they didn't vote on it with the whole congregation. The ladies just went out and they picked this really nice material and they had the pews recovered. Only problem is there was a unicorn in the material. You'd have thought it was Satan himself. They had all kinds of trouble over that. But conflict requires tough love. Because in the midst of conflict, this spiritual thing that's happening needs to be addressed. You see, in these spiritual conflict that require tough love, difficult situations call for a calm but firm response. If we get all excited and yell and scream at one another, we're not going to solve anything. The way we need to deal with these issues when they come up, and thankfully we don't got any big ones right now, although I'm sure we'll have some sometime, is we need to deal with them with a calm and firm response. Look what Paul says, I write in the gentle but firm Spirit of Christ. When Jesus dealt with problems, he dealt with them gently, but he also dealt with them firmly. It's important that we face these conflicts, but we also need to be prepared to confront the detractors. Now, when I was at one of my interims in the Sacramento area, we discovered pretty early on that a gentleman who had been acting as the greeter for several decades in the church was saying inappropriate things and touching women in inappropriate ways. This had been going on for years, and no one had said anything about it until one lady said, "Okay, that's enough." And so we sat down with this gentleman and we explained to him that he was not going to be able to do that anymore. And if he did, we would be calling the police. We gave him some options that I'll talk about in a minute. And the option that he chose was to leave the church. He had been getting away with it for all these years. I guess he couldn't face not getting away with it anymore. The problem is that some of the folks were upset that we had confronted him. They were upset that we had told him that he couldn't act this way anymore. Because, well, he's been here forever and we just love him. Yes, but he's not a nice person. There's going to be detractors anytime we deal with a situation of conflict and say, wait a minute, that's not really a problem. But Paul says, don't think that I'll hesitate a minute to stand up to those who say I'm an unprincipled opportunist. They'll have to eat their words. You see, Paul was dealing with some conflict in the church in Corinth that was deep-seated. And the people had been divided over a couple of issues. I don't want to get into them, they're pretty complex. But he was saying, look, we need to face these things head on in order to solve these issues. He said, third, we need to understand that the church does things differently. The world is unprincipled. It's dog eat dog out there. The world doesn't fight fair, but we don't live or fight our battles that way. Never have and never will. When we approached this gentleman who had been mistreating women, we said, look, we've got a couple of options for you. The first option is that we will pay for you to go to counseling. We found a counselor who specialized in dealing with men with these problems. He was accredited and had done a great volume of good work, and we told this gentleman that we would pay for 10 counseling sessions with this particular counselor so he could begin to understand his problem and work through it. Because we Christians aren't just about kicking people out. We're about changing lives. You see, in the church, we seek to change lives, not attack individuals. Now, his choice was option number 2. He could leave the church, and he chose option number 2. But we offered to help him, because we aren't just about clearing out all the bad folks. If we cleared out all the bad folks, there wouldn't be nobody left. We want to change lives. That's what this whole Christian stuff is about. That's what Jesus came to do, was to change lives. He said, I came to seek and to save those who are lost. But it's also important that we understand that when we deal with church conflict, and it is spiritual conflict, that spiritual conflict requires spiritual authority. Paul says, you may think I overstate the authority that Christ gave me, but I'm not backing off. Every bit of my commitment is for the purpose of building you up, after all, not tearing you down. The leadership of our church has been given authority by this congregation, and I also believe by God, to deal with the issues that this church faces. You know, when Jesus said to his disciples, go ye therefore into all the nations and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, that was a command. He didn't say, okay, so now I'm going to leave, and what I'd like you to do is to take a few classes, and then if you feel really good about yourself, I'd like you to consider maybe going out into the world and witnessing to folks. That's not what Jesus did. He gave them a command. Go ye therefore. Now, those of you who have been in the military understand that when you've been given a command, it's an order that you follow. But when you've been given a command, you've also been given the authority to carry it out. You see, we've been given the authority, the spiritual authority by God, to deal with the issues that we face, not just in the church, but in life in general. You see, there are some solutions for conflict that we face. There are some solutions that require spiritual ministry. Not just counseling. Not just let's get together and talk this through. It requires participation between us and our Creator to get through some difficult times. Now, there's three things we need to understand in this. And the interesting thing is that we can substitute the word faith for church in each of these. First, we need to understand that church, or our faith, is not a competition. It's not a race. We don't have numbers on our chests. We aren't getting to see who can be to the end of the Christianness first and get the biggest prize. Paul says we're not, putting ourselves in a league with those who boast that there are superiors. But in all this comparing and grading and competing, they quite miss the point. There's no super Christians in our group. The difference between me, your pastor, and you, the regular folks in the church, is that I went to seminary and passed some tests. And I've been ordained by the presbytery to do this job. I'm not holier than you. I'm certainly not smarter than you. I'm not any better than you. I have a particular job to do. But it's not a competition. The one who gets the most spiritual brownie points doesn't win. You see, because we need to understand that church and faith is a team sport. We're sticking to the limits of what God has set for us, but there can be no question that those limits reach to and include you. We're all part of this. We're together as a team doing this ministry that God has called us to. There's something important that we have to do. Not to be the best Christian we could be and get to heaven first, is to make sure that we include everyone that we can include in the process. I don't know about you, but when I find something really cool, I want to share it with everybody. I found these really cool solar lanterns. They look like they're on fire. It's a little flame-looking bulb, and when they go on at night, it looks like you got little flame bulbs out there. I've been calling everybody going, hey, come over and look at these flame bulbs. I'm surprised they haven't called the fire department yet. Looks like my backyard's burning up. But when we find something cool or neat or exciting, we want to share that with others. That's what we're about in this place, sharing it with others so that we can build the team. Look, I'm not here to build a 5,000 member church. I don't want to have the biggest church in Spring Hill. I want us to build the best church in Spring Hill because God is here and we're reaching out and helping others to discover that God is there for them too. And finally, the thing we need to understand that this church and our faith is all about God. Paul says, as your lives grow in faith, you'll play a part within our expanding work. What you say about yourself means nothing in God's work. It's what God says about you that makes the difference. This isn't about Keith's church. This isn't about your church. This is about God's church. And our goal is not to be the biggest. It's to be the best church that we can possibly be. Doing the best work that we can possibly do. Reaching as many people as we can possibly reach with the good news of the gospel. You see, Jesus said, I came to seek and to save those who are lost. And our job is to complete His work. This stuff we do is so important that we can't afford to be fighting among ourselves. I've been very pleased in the almost 5 years that I've been here. We haven't really had any big fights. Doesn't mean they ain't coming, though. But when they do come, we're going to deal with them appropriately. We're going to deal with them as the church is called to deal with them, with tough love and with spiritual ministry. Because that's what we're called to do. I hope that if you're new to this church, you experience a place here where people love one another. You know, we have to start playing the beginning chorus because you guys would be out there yapping it up for an hour. That's wonderful. We're a bunch of friendly people. But it doesn't just stop in here. It needs to leak outside the doors and go home with us. We need to practice that friendliness and joy with the folks that we meet in our neighborhood and at the places where we shop and the places where we work. Because I know that there's someone that you're coming into contact with on a regular basis who's hurting. And they need some good news. Not someone thumping them over the head with the Bible. But as I've been saying for the last year or so, if we could start just by being nice, we can open all kinds of doors when they say, gee, why are you being nice to me? Well, you know, somebody was real nice to me. Well, who is that? Well, I tell you what, why don't you come to church with me on Sunday? Maybe you'll learn a little bit about it. Now, that wasn't that hard. That's what we're called to do. Go ye therefore into every nation with the good news of the gospel.